Just about. Okay, we're live on YouTube. Our presentation today is on property, and as we approach this in planning and preparing for this, we thought it would be important to have Ryan Hatch, the department manager for our marketing department, who deals with all the coverage issues and really what your policy is and how, and they're really your frontline contact with the trust, to come on and talk about the trust property program, and give us just some basics about that, and get you some contact information if you have some more questions. So right now we'll turn the time over to Ryan Hatch.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason, and good morning, everybody. Just glad to be here with you, and we are anxiously awaiting the day where we can visit more of you in person with everything that's going on with COVID-19. So stay safe out there and keep up your social distancing. So with that, let's see, Jason. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that first bullet there. We're excited because we have what we have seen as one of the broadest property policies in the state. In fact, in my 12-year career, it's probably the broadest policy that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of policies. We launched this property program, this newer form, in 2016, and it is backed by about 20 different A-rated, AM Best A-rated reinsurers that are really Lloyd's of London syndicates. And so we're just excited about it. It's backed by some stellar organizations, and it's very broad, and we're excited. So it's allowed us to stabilize our rates. I have yet to see an increase in our property rates since I've worked at the trust. We have seen a hardening in the market in the past few years, and especially this year. And so we're finally starting to see some changes in rates just nationally. But this program that we put into place has really helped us to stabilize rates and enhance coverage. So as many of you probably know, the trust is the standard carrier for most of Utah's cities, towns, districts, and counties. And so leveraging our size collectively as a group has allowed us to really go out and do what we've done with this property policy. And I should just put a plug in there too. If you'd ever like to call and kind of geek out on the policy, we like to say, and really get into the nitty gritties, we're happy to do that. We love to eat, drink, and sleep insurance, and we're happy to talk about that stuff anytime. So with that, one of the common questions that we get is what to schedule or what to insure. And so one of the things that I would say is if you question if you should schedule something or not, then you probably should schedule it. It's probably got some value there that you'd like to schedule. So generally speaking, you want to schedule your buildings, including those that are under construction. If you are required to carry the builder's risk, sometimes in your contract, you will contract the builder's risk out to the company doing the construction. But oftentimes where you have insurable interest, you are required to carry the builder's risk. So any buildings that are under construction or renovation, you'll want to schedule tanks, pavilions, playgrounds, your contents, electronics, fine arts, business income, mobile equipment, contractors equipment, even equipment in the open. We have our municipalities that will schedule street lights and meters and just different miscellaneous tools and other portable equipment. So any of those things, that's a pretty broad statement there, but really any of those things you would want to schedule on your policy. And when we say schedule, that means really just list and insure with the trust. So that's essentially what you want to schedule or insure. But how does coverage apply? How does that typically apply? And usually what we find is that people are accustomed to kind of their simple policies, their standard homeowners policies. These commercial forms for big corporations or municipalities or governmental entities are different. I mean, they're much bigger and can be a bit more sophisticated. And so one of the things that we have found, particularly with the commercial market is a coinsurance clause. And coinsurance essentially is sharing in the loss with the carrier. And so fortunately, with the trust, we don't necessarily have coinsurance in our policy. It's one of the things that we're excited about that we tout. But normally in a commercial policy, the carrier requires the insured to list or schedule the property at a certain value, maybe 80% or 90% of the value. And if you experience a loss and you have that value listed with the carrier for below that threshold, then you get to join in on the loss and pay coinsurance. And so we like to tout that we don't have coinsurance. However, if you have a property or structure of some sort that has not been scheduled and you experience a loss, you could be subject to a higher deductible. And so typically, many of our members have lower deductibles, maybe $1,000 on their property. Those are totally customizable, by the way. But if you have failed to schedule one of your properties, you could be subject to a higher deductible. Still much better than coinsurance, which is usually a much higher percentage of the loss that you'll pay. But you'll want to just be aware and cognizant of updating your schedule on a regular basis. And I'm sure that's something that Jason is probably going to go into a little bit more later on, but you'll want to just make sure that you're doing that. And so with that, if you don't know how to get a list of your properties, or you want to see what we have on file with you, you can reach out to us at any time, and we're happy to provide those. Just call your assigned representative, or you can always call me. Jason has got my number listed right there on the screen. That's my direct line. So you can call anytime with questions, or we can go ahead and export schedules for you to review. We recommend that you do that regularly, at least annually, to make sure that you're reconciling your list of assets and inventory with what we have on file. So if we keep moving here, one of the ways that you can do this is through our member portal. We call that MyTrust, and it's a proprietary member portal that we've put together over the last few years, where you can go in and you can print invoices, see what your coverage limits and deductibles are, and export those property and auto schedules either as a PDF or as an Excel file. We've been rolling that out systematically this whole year, and so if you don't have access to MyTrust yet, don't worry. We will get to you, and we'll make sure that you have login credentials so that you can get in and access some of that information. With that, along with MyTrust, we provide many different benefits with the property program. And one of these includes free property valuations or property appraisals. The third party that we work with to do that is Lowry & Associates, or LAI. Some of you have probably met with them or spoken with them. They use industry-leading software, Marshall and Swift software, to make sure that the values that we have on file for your buildings is accurate. And it's amazing to me over the years to see where some of these values that have been corrected have been off by 20, 30, 40%, or in some cases, we have identified properties that have never been listed or scheduled with the trust that are in the multi-millions of dollars in terms of value. And so that's always a surprise to me when our appraisers go out to do these valuations and find properties, seven-figure properties that are not listed on the schedule. So you'll definitely want to take care of that and pay attention to that. So with the policy, one of the questions that comes up commonly is how are items valued in the event of a loss? You know, what kind of reimbursement or indemnification can we expect to see if we have a loss? And so generally speaking, the policy pays on replacement cost less your deductible. And again, the deductibles are customizable based on your appetite for risk. And so we're happy to look at different options that make sense for you and for your organization. But generally speaking, we do pay on replacement cost. Autos sometimes are a little bit different. I don't know how much we're going to be talking about vehicles today, Jason, but autos are typically paid on actual cash value, but we do have some benefits for newer vehicles, those that are 3 years and newer that are on file with us, where we also pay replacement cost. And again, we can answer questions on those, or feel free to call us with questions on those at any time. Okay, so I wanted to highlight a few of the enhancements that we've seen since we brought this new policy online in 2016. One of those is first and third party cyber security. Cyber liability and cyber in general is really a newer coverage in the insurance world. I mean, it's really in its infancy. Underwriters and actuaries are really still wrapping their heads around this risk because it's so new in relation to all the other types of insurance that you see. Nonetheless, we've seen an uptick in claims in this area, and you've probably heard and read about different claims nationwide and even here locally about ransom attacks and just different cyber events. And so we're excited because we've added that first and third party cyber. When we say first party, we're talking really about your systems, your data, your software. Third party, we're talking about the privacy information and data that belongs to other people, but maybe you house in your systems. So third party information that you house on your systems. Similarly, we added first and third party pollution coverage. We've used that several times now. And again, first party would be you and your site, your premises. Third party would be someone else that's affected by your operations and maybe a pollution condition that you're responsible for. Finally, crime. We've always had crime. We've also provided bonds for our members that need bonding for their different positions. But we were able to increase the crime limit from $250,000 to $5 million. And we were excited about that. In addition to that crime coverage, that it now satisfies the requirement for public treasurers in the state of Utah. So many of you are probably familiar with the Money Management Council in Utah and the bonding requirement for those public treasurers, but this policy covers that requirement. And so sometimes when you're audited, you'll need verification of that, and we can provide evidence of insurance for that. And then finally, it's not listed on here, but Jason reminded me before the meeting about drones. And drones are a big thing. I mean, 10 years ago, you never even heard anybody asking questions about coverage for drones, but now it's a very common question. And we do have coverage for drones, and that spans from liability coverage while in flight to first party property coverage. So if your drone is stolen or burns up in a warehouse, we have first party coverage for that. Either way, we like to have those items scheduled. So we like to have them on file with the specs of the drone and the value, and then we can cover those. Some of our members have high value drones, and they elect for in-flight first party property coverage. We can provide that as well. So essentially that could be a high value drone that you crash while it's in flight. And we can also get coverage for that. There's a higher rate for that. It does cost more, but we can certainly provide it. So those are just some of the basics and some of the basic enhancements to our newer property program. We could probably go on for an hour or more, but Jason's limited me. But at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions and take up as much of Jason's time as he will allow me to do so.
Yeah, folks, go ahead and type your questions into the chat box, and we'll get those to Ryan here. You can see why I asked Ryan to come in and do this presentation. This is some of the nitty gritty of the insurance things, and like he said, there's a lot more details than this. So if you do have questions, definitely make sure you talk with Ryan or your account executive there, and they can take you through all of these things. Just while we're waiting for any questions that may come up. So just going back on that drone coverage, you said liability coverage. So if you crash your drone into somebody's house or something like that, how does that work?
Great question. And remind me in a minute just to touch on sublimits for all property in general. But with the drones, There's no additional cost for the liability coverage. So we do have that. Again, we would like to have your drone scheduled even for liability coverage. But if you're at fault for some type of damage while flying that drone around and we've got it scheduled, then we have some coverage for you there at no additional cost. Usually when you damage the property of somebody else, you're also damaging your drone. And so I would say that the majority of our members and our folks don't opt to purchase the in-flight coverage for their drone, because usually the drones are worth maybe, $2,000 and they have $1,000 deductible, so they're not too worried about it. But we have some other members that have drones that are quite expensive. They're very elaborate. They've got expensive cameras on them and other systems. And so you may think about scheduling some of those for to have in-flight coverage. Liability, again, as long as you schedule those with us, you're going to have coverage either way without an additional premium. But to the property would be an additional premium. And the difference there, again, is just, is it on the ground or is it in flight, really? So, and then also I mentioned just sublimits in general. Our policy is very broad. Oftentimes we will get questions about, hey, what if I forget to schedule something? What if I forget to schedule fine arts or some equipment or an actual structure? Well, we do have some coverage. In fact, we have coverage for automatic acquisition, and we have coverage for miscellaneous unnamed locations. But usually with those types of properties, you're subject to, one, maybe a different deductible, and two, a sublimit. And when we say sublimit, that's usually a lower underlying limit that may or may not cover the entire loss, depending on what the extent of the loss is. And so it's always safer to just schedule, everything that you can, so that it's not subject to those deductibles and sublimits.
Well, Ryan, you did a great job on that, and like I said, this is some of the nitty gritty of this is there's a lot in the details there, but as Ryan says, we have a really broad form, a lot of coverage, but things like drones that not everybody has, there may be an additional sublimit or something on those. So, awesome, thanks, Ryan. And the question is, what information do you need for drones?
Great question. So just the primary specs, the year, make, model, serial number, and the value. If there is a camera, most of these drones have cameras. We usually get the value for both the drone and the camera, even if the camera is permanently attached. And that's about it. That's really about it on the drone.
Okay. Very good. Looks like that's all the questions we have. I bet some more will come before we're done with the presentation today. Thank you so much, Ryan. We appreciate that. And Ryan's going to stay on the presentation for the Q&A at the end, or if we have some questions as we go along, and so he can answer those, so I don't have to take a swing at something like that. All right. Well, we'll dive into property protection portion of this presentation and what I'm presenting on today. And just a couple of things to think about to start with is property coverage versus general liability and workers' comp. We spend a lot of time talking about general liability exposures. We talk about workers' compensation and worker safety and all of these things. We probably spend proportionally a little less time talking about property. And that's probably reasonable, because when we see, the majority of the claims that we see are really in those areas: workers' compensation, general liability type claims. The problem is property, when it happens, in the risk world, we talk about frequency and probability of those things, and also what is the severity when it does happen. With property, when it happens, it can be really bad. You can lose your entire building. You can lose the vast majority of the value that you own in your organization in one fire. and so this is an important subject, and so there are some differences. Some people talk about, what do we schedule and all of that. Some people are worried about, well, what if I didn't schedule this property that we own and somebody gets injured there? There's a difference between liability and property. When we're talking property, we're talking actually about the physical structure, the things that you own. Whereas if somebody came onto your property and they got injured, that would be more of a general liability type claim. So that's just a quick clarification going into this, because I've had a number of questions that kind of going down that road recently. Property risks are, if you own property, you have a risk, even if it's open raw land that is has no structures on it. You have some risks there, and people ask, what do I schedule? And Ryan's done a good job to talk to us about that. What do I schedule? It's a good idea, like he said, is if there's some value, put that on your schedule, so we have that, and so we have the coverage there. And today we're going to talk about property loss prevention. So Ryan's already kind of hit this, but we need to know our property. So as we look at scheduling, it's not just buildings, raw land. We look at things like parks, playgrounds, cemeteries, and you ask yourself, well, why do we want to schedule a playground? Well, we've had situations where an arsonist went out and poured gasoline on a playground and lit it on fire. And if you look around the country, that's fairly regular. Those type of facilities that we don't pay attention to all that much, our water infrastructure, our wastewater infrastructure, tanks and well houses and things like that, are things that sometimes get overlooked when we're putting together our property schedule. Cyber, Ryan talked about that just a little bit. We'll talk a little more, but those high value items, if I've got something that's of intrinsic value, I remember going into one of your facilities one day, and there was this beautiful painting on the wall, and it was a big mural. And I asked a couple of questions about it, and it turned out that this mural was by a famous artist, and it had an amazing intrinsic value. I don't remember what it was, but it seemed like it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And sometimes we'll have those in our property. Sometimes they may be things that we don't even own ourselves. They're on loan from somewhere, from some other place. And so we've got to be aware of what property that we have. And Ryan talked about contents that we have coverage on that. And this is something that you can take home as much as you use at work. But let's figure out what our contents are. Have you at your home gone around maybe just with your phone and taken a video of the contents of your home? So if your house ever burns down, we can really look at kind of what the value, not us, but your property, your homeowner's insurance carrier can look at what's that value of that. So that's some of the challenges that we may face if we do ever have a catastrophic loss, is what did we have? And so look at those contents and what those values may be for those things, particularly if they're of high intrinsic value. He asked the question, what do you schedule? The Jar Jar Binks tie beanie baby may have been pretty valuable a long time ago, but it isn't worth much right now. And so we want to make conscious decisions about what it is that we schedule, and more importantly, what we decide not to schedule. And I just give a little advice on that. If you make a determination not to schedule a certain property, I would talk to your governing board about that and seek their approval and say, here's why I've made a determination not to schedule this, so we don't end up having a loss of some property, and then we look back and you or somebody in the organization made a decision, yeah, we're not going to schedule that. We don't want to pay a premium because it's this or whatever the reasoning may be. Make conscious decisions there and make sure everybody's on board with that. Just good risk management practice for everybody involved. So like Ryan said, look at your schedule at least annually. And we've seen this time and time again where we've had properties sometimes that are valued in the millions that aren't on a schedule just because, well, we built this property and kind of forgot to add it. And, you know, we work to help you with that as we do our property valuations. They'll go out and look at those. But this is something to look at. The other side of the coin is maybe you sell a piece of property, take it off the schedule. No reason to be paying a premium for properties that you don't own anymore. And verify that those are listed correctly. Our My Trust portal makes it really easy. You can go in and change the name. I was involved recently with a member that, hey, this name isn't right on this property. We want to change the name. And so it was really easy for them to go in and make some modifications through My Trust. So use those resources that are available. All right, so we're going to talk about property perils. And these are the standard ones that we face, and they're ones that we see on a regular basis. Maybe some not as much as others. Earthquakes, we say, well, they don't happen very often, but this year has been kind of an exceptional year all the way around. So I want to hit each one of those, but to start with, I want to just clarify something about these risks. I'm going to talk about in some generalities about these risks, but your risks are specific to you. They're specific to your site, and it may be that you have a risk that is much worse at your site than it is with your neighboring entity that's just a few miles away because of your specific location. We talk about floods or things like that. If you live in Davis County or your organization is in Davis County, you have particular exposure to east winds. We get these high winds that downslope winds that come into the valley. And we just had a massive wind event there. If you're in southern Utah, you might be dealing with flash floods. If you're in Bryan Head or Alda, snow loading may be the issue with your property. So as you consider your property decisions, think very, deeply about what does this mean in where I live. So asphalt shingles might make a lot of sense along most areas of the Wasatch Front, but if you're in Washington County, they may not make nearly as much sense. You may be using more of a tile roofing material there because of the weather extremes that you have. Think about the prevailing winds, but also think about those freak winds that come in Davis County. When we think about the construction of our facilities, Bryan Head and Alda are going to think about snow loading, but St. George doesn't have to worry about that. Okay. All right. First, the perils that we'll talk about. I'm going to do just a little introduction, and then we'll talk about some of the controls that we can put in place. Fire, this is kind of the original property peril, what people are worried about. And so for many people, when they refer to property insurance, they call it fire insurance, because that's the major thing they're worried about. If my house burns down, I want to be able to be restored and not have to start that mortgage all over again and build that house. Fires come from a number of different ways. Some of those are internal, some of those are external, from an arsonist or a wildland fire. And those of you that are located, your facilities are located in an interface with the wildland areas, have more exposure to that. And if you've watched the news lately, you can see in California and all along the West Coast, just the terrible fires that have occurred and the massive amount of property that's lost. When Ryan talks about a hardening of the market, what happens in the commercial market is when you have major losses like that, you have hurricanes that hit and you have massive fires and all of those things, it hardens the market. And that's one of the things that the trust has been able to dampen is the change in those rates. In the private market, you get these massive swings because you have huge fires, you have huge hurricanes and things like that hit that market. Floods. Couple of things to consider about floods is, where did it originate? For as a homeowner, this is a really important consideration, because if the flood comes in from outside your house, it's not covered under your homeowner's insurance. You would need to seek outside coverage, flood insurance coverage, and if you're in a flood zone, through the National Flood Insurance Program. If it comes from inside your house, I have a pipe break or things like that, that would be something that would probably be covered under your homeowner's insurance. With the trust, we have flood coverage, but we want to look at those specific sources, and we'll talk about how to handle each one of those and the direction that they come from. Storms. This is one that's fresh on our mind because, hey, it's 2020. We have a different plague about every week, and one of those was we had this massive windstorm, and we also had hail damage. We had multiple hailstorms, and we saw roofs and other parts of structures damaged from hailstorms. Whoops, I kind of clicked the button too quickly. There we go. Snow loading, temperature extremes based on where you're at. We don't see a lot of those hurricanes, tornadoes, those things like that, the potentials that are out there. And that's actually is a really, really great thing for us in Utah, because we don't have to experience those, but also because it doesn't impact our coverage nearly as much, or our costs, because we don't have those exposures. Earthquakes. So we had a pretty significant earthquake. It wasn't the big one this year, but we had a significant earthquake, 5.7, and it woke everybody up. But it was interesting. Think about your own experience. How did you take, and those of you in southern Utah may not have felt this very much. I'm up in far northern Utah, and I was actually smiling as it was happening. I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. As I'm looking around to make sure that things aren't breaking. I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. And then as we compared notes with some of the coworkers here at the trust, some of them were really in fear. They were afraid everything was coming down, and it really had to do with the micro zones of earthquakes. And so as I talk about this, that our risks are really site dependent, it really is. And a mile different can make a massive difference in what you experience in an earthquake. Liquefaction zones and things like that cause that shaking to be much worse. Also consider utility disruption when it comes to earthquakes, because that can be one of the biggest challenges. Even if we don't have any property damage, even if the building doesn't collapse, those utility disruptions or gas leaks can lead to the rest of that. Crime, the exposure that we see there can come from internal or external. It could be embezzlement, it could be somebody breaking in, and vandalism is an ongoing problem and a challenge that many of us see. With the cyber risk that we face, Ryan talked about this a little bit. It could be data loss. Somebody comes in and with ransomware, and they lock up our system. They encrypt all of our data and say, you got to pay us $5,000, or we're just going to delete all of your data, and you don't have it anymore. We have loss of personal information. Many of you out there take personal information as a part of your operation, and what happens if that gets hacked and it gets out? We've seen massive losses of records out there, that even to the tune of 80 million, 100 million individuals in this country have had their information hacked. If you don't think your information's been hacked yet, you're probably living in a dream, because most of us probably have. And you may end up getting a check in the mail from one of these companies that says, here's your $3, because there was a class action suit against this company because they lost your data and it was used inappropriately. Well, you may have gotten $2 out of it, but the overall that the company had to pay may have been in the tens of millions of dollars. Phishing attacks. I went in my spam box the other day looking for an email that hadn't showed up, and I saw multiple phishing attacks, and I thought, good job, IT, you gave me a buffer here. Because I've seen several phishing attacks where Steve Hansen, the CEO here, will send me an email, only it's not from Steve. And he's asking me to do something or other. And if you look at the email address, it isn't from Steve. And if you fall for that, there have been a number of our local government agencies around the state who have fallen for these and have lost anywhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 10, 20, 30 million, not million, $1,000 that is just gone, and they can't replace that. Denial of service attacks. Right now, there's the police, our departments around the country are facing a lot of scrutiny. And one of the things that happens when an officer involved shooting or something happens that places an individual department in the forefront of the news cycle is many times there are denial of service attacks. They attack the website for the city, website for the police department, and make it so you can't do business. There was a report last week. I don't know if you saw it. This news cycle's so fast, but there were 911 outages across the country, not the entire system, but in multiple places across the country. And they didn't say much more than that in the news story, but in my mind, I said either there's an issue with some software somewhere, or that was an attack, and they're trying to probe the system to see if they could hit that. When I knew it was 911, or if it's a police department that has an outage there, it makes a lot of sense that it may be some sort of an intentional attack. There's a quote here from former FBI Director Robert Mueller. You've probably heard of him before. He said there are only two types of companies: those who have been hacked and those who will be. It's going to happen, and so we want to be prepared for that. Through this on here, as we're talking about the different perils, some specialty things here. You may have a police department that has canine officers, and we do have coverage for those canine officers. Drones, builder's risk. Ryan's already talked about these things, but there are some specialty things that may be in the back of our mind, or we may not think about, but we definitely have to address those and plan for those things. So with a canine officer, if somebody, an officer's in the line of duty and goes in and a person shoots that dog, stabs it, poisons it, things like that, there's coverage there to help replace that dog. But I talked to Ryan about this morning, that we definitely want to make sure that those canine officers are scheduled. So we know that you have them, and we have an idea of what the value is on that canine officer. Okay. And Ryan, feel free to jump in anytime if you want to.
Yeah, I was going to just mention on the builder's risk. One of the things that we've seen commonly is, because that construction phase takes some time, 6 months, 9 months, a year. And so we'll schedule a building for builder's risk. They complete the project. Our member, the insured, is given a certificate of occupancy. And then they forget to circle back around and schedule it under just the standard property on the schedule. The reason I bring it up is because the rate for builder's risk, and this is not uncommon, this is not unique to the trust, but the rate is higher, much higher on the builder's risk than just the standard property. So
yeah, because it's a lot riskier period for that building when it's under construction than it is after everything is in place and all of that. Ryan, while I've got you on here, there's a question: is there a cost for the canine officers?
Yeah, so if it's scheduled, so again, this is one of those things, and honestly, we're careful about the policy, because while we do have coverage for, and I'm going back again and kind of talking about miscellaneous, unnamed location, and different things that are unscheduled. Again, this is one of the broadest policies I've seen, and so likely there will be coverage for things that aren't scheduled, but they could be subject to a sublimit or a deductible. And that's kind of how it is with the canines too. We have coverage for unscheduled specialty animals, and the valuation in the event of a loss is just different depending on if they are scheduled or not. And so anything that is scheduled is going to have an associated cost. So there's a rate based on the value that you would pay. And so, but usually for, property is one of those things that is relative to all the other risks that are out there, is very inexpensive. I mean, it's just pennies on the dollar. The premium is pennies on the dollar in comparison to the value. And so, and I don't say that lightly, because these are, tax dollars that we're mostly talking about that are going to pay these premiums. But relatively speaking, it's very, very inexpensive to schedule items, including canines or property or anything else. So,
and I was going to bring that up as well. Adding a canine on there is not going to add significantly to your premium, but in the event of a loss of that animal, it definitely would ensure that you're insured for the appropriate amount. I have one more question since we've taken a little pause here. Is it standard to have a property owner hold builder's risk insurance instead of requiring the builder to hold the coverage?
Great question. Both.
Yeah.
We see both very, very commonly, and it really just depends on the agreement that you have in place. A lot of contractors are accustomed to carrying that builder's risk, and so they do. If you have that on the contract, great. All I would say is just remember, and I'm kind of stating the obvious here, but you would be amazed at how many times the obvious gets overlooked. But you just want to make sure that once you've completed that project, whether it's a renovation or a new build, just get that on the schedule. I mean, we have coverage for automatic acquisition, and there's some grace periods in the policy to cover you, but they're not in perpetuity. So you'll want to definitely get those scheduled at some point. Yeah. And we're kind of indifferent on the builder's risk. I mean, if the contractor carries it, great. If we put it on there for you, that's great too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think my experience seeing that is some of the larger contractors, if you're one of these giant construction companies, they generally build that in, but you can really design that in the contract phase of that, who covers that, and compare where it makes the most sense. Okay, I got to go fast. Just I want to talk about some universal controls. Since this is one of those areas that it's easy to kind of get on the back burner, and it's not that out front visible thing that's in front of me all the time, we need to build a plan and put something together to ensure that we cover these property risks. So we wanted to begin that plan at the design or purchase phase. Sometimes we see and I put on here the word artsy because I couldn't come up with another, but you might have some building. We see a city will go out and build this beautiful building that has some really unique architectural features that look great, but they're a disaster when it comes to maintenance, and also they might be extremely expensive to replace. So think about those things. Think about building in at the design process our risk management in our buildings, whether it's fire suppression systems, earthquake controls. All of these things should be planned ahead of time. And for many of you out there, you are intimately connected to the building official. You have a building official in-house, or at least really close, and you can use them to look at code. Also, as you're building your contracts, you're bringing an architect or design group in to put those in place. Ensure that there's some language in there that talks about to current code, or specify the building code and all of those things. Specify to earthquake standards to your zones. Put those things in place. Use those folks. You probably have a fire department close and a fire marshal that can help you with the fire prevention side of things. Use those folks. They're great resources with a wealth of knowledge, and they can help you out. In addition to those of us that trust that can help out. Facility inspection program. Talk about that right now. This is just an essential part. Have a monthly facility inspection. This could be done by each individual department, and we push this for a long time, but go out and physically look and ensure that the fire extinguisher is there and that it's charged, that the fire suppression system is in working order, and there are no problems there. If you go back to that housekeeping presentation that Doug did this morning, check that kind of stuff, and then let's take action. That's how we ensure that it works. Periodically, as we go around doing risk assessments at your facilities, we'll find 1 or 2 fire extinguishers that haven't been updated or inspected, or they've been discharged and they're still hanging on the wall. Well, how do we ensure that we don't miss those? Put together an inventory system and put a tag on them. And a tag in the location, so that when your contractor comes out to inspect those things, we can hand them the list and say, here's the location, here are the numbers for each one of those, make sure you get all of them, so we don't miss that. There are certain things like boilers and pressure vessels that require frequent inspections. Some of those are inspected by the Industrial Commission here, or the Labor Commission, and they will come out and inspect those. Don't take that as oh, this is OSHA coming out to inspect me. This is something that is very beneficial to you. And I saw there was a pretty massive fire here in the state last week, and it was due to a boiler explosion, from what the news report said. That's an easy way to lose your entire building, is to have a boiler or pressure vessel fail. Tag those things, document these. That's going to help us. All right, so let's talk about each one of these perils and some of the things that we can do. Fire. Let me go back to that one. I put this picture on here because this is a water tank burning. A water tank in the state of Utah. And sometimes we think about, oh, well, it's a concrete tank up there on the side of the hill. Why do we have to worry about that? Well, it may not be 100% concrete. It may not be all buried underground. There may be fire risk. And so, we look at a tank like that, and what do we do in controlling vegetation around there? Because many times these tanks are on the side of the hill up above town. And our responsibility would be to look at that. It's in the wild, on the interface with the wildland area. How do we ensure that a fire doesn't get to our structures? And if we do have combustible materials there, can we change that, or can we protect those some way in the event that we do have a wildland fire? When we talk about internal fires, there are some dumb things that we do. We light candles and forget about them in the workplace. We bring in space heaters that and put them near the recycle bin, and we light fires that way. We do hot work. We have a contractor climb up on the roof to do some work on the HVAC system, and they pull out a torch and light the roof of our building on fire. We have electrical issues where we put extension cords in places they shouldn't be used, and we use those for long periods of time. We use flammable liquids. And that's one that's, as I walked through the truss today, we got hand sanitizer everywhere. We've got flammable liquids that we never had prior to 2020. And is that a risk? Are we going to burn the truss down with hand sanitizer? Probably not, but it definitely increased our overall risk. All right, so let's talk about fire prevention program. I put hot work program top of the list because everyone should have a hot work program. What does that mean? That means before you do some hot work, that means lighting a fire, that means welding, or cutting with a torch, or grinding that's going to make a spark. If somebody's doing that on your facility, it either needs to be in a designated area that's like a welding area that's hardened and has protection from fire, or there needs to be a hot work permit that goes along with that. So when that contractor gets up on your roof to work on your HVAC system, they need to fill out a hot work permit to allow them to do that, which specifies what they have to do to control the fire and notify you. And then you go and verify that all that's happened. You say, oh, great, another program. Well, this is one of those essential programs that everyone should have in place because it's really easy to lose our entire operation if you get a fire on the roof of your building or someplace like that, and we're not paying attention. Have a fire prevention plan. So under OSHA, you're required to have a fire prevention plan and an emergency action plan that talks about evacuation, talks about your alarming, all of those things. Writing the plan can help us identify issues in our facilities. Here's a couple of things that I think should be in there. An open flame policy. Ban those open flames like candles. What about space heaters? I'm okay with space heaters as long as you handle those appropriately. You let people know that they can't be next to the recycle bin, and if people leave those on when they're not at their desk, they won't be able to use those heaters. Make sure that they're grounded appropriately, and make sure that they have a tip over protection. So if they tip over, they're not going to light the carpet on fire, they'll turn off. If you have a suppression system, there are required tests and maintenance that need to be done. And especially with this with the suppression system, that's a fire sprinkler. If it's taken out of service, it's called impaired. If you impair that system, you need to make notifications on that and notify your alarm company. Also notify the trust. Now, many property insurers have an exclusion in their policy that says if you don't let us know and you impair your system, you don't have any coverage. That's pretty strong, but that's how strongly many in the property industry feel about this. So if your system is impaired, that should be for the minimal amount of time, and like I said, those notifications should come in so we can check back and make sure it's back online. Electrical system maintenance with your electrical is important to inspect for those cords. Clean, clear, adequate. When we talk about electrical circuits, adequate circuits for what we're dealing with. If you have large electrical systems, 480 panels, those types of things, we recommend that you have a regular thermal imaging done on those, so you can find those circuits that are loose or not functioning right. You can tell when the heat is more in one of the legs of the circuit, and that can prevent damage to your equipment and also can prevent fires. And then fire extinguisher, make sure that maintenance is happening. The best one that I've seen, if you remember when Lance Mergens was here, that was a while ago, but he had one. He went out and he found a fire extinguisher that the last time it'd been inspected was 1989, and they're supposed to be inspected every year. And that was impressive. The mayor of the town that had that extinguisher actually, I can't remember if he framed it or he put it on. I think he put it on town letterhead and sent it to Lance, because he was pretty proud of that, and was that grateful for Lance pointing that out, that it had been 20 plus years since they'd looked at that fire extinguisher. Train our staff on emergency evacuations. Just quickly on floods. Here are a few things that we can do to prepare for flooding. If you're in an area where flooding is an issue, how do I know that? Well, there are flood maps, and you can go online and find those. Am I in a flood zone? Look at history. If you're in southern Utah, there's a fair chance that you're at risk of flash flooding, just because of the nature of the storms that happen and the terrain down there. It doesn't soak up water very well. It runs. So we look at the siding of our buildings and where they are. Sometimes we have to look into building berms and other diversions, and just locating things to prevent that water from entering our buildings. We should be doing fair weather inspections of our roofs. Look at and this goes for our homes as well right now. After these leaves fall, we should be getting up there or having somebody get up there and clean those gutters out, because if we don't, that could lead to flooding. We should be looking at our stormwater systems to clear those out, to verify that we don't have a lot of debris over top of the stormwater openings. Plumbing inside of our building. Frost-proofing those, the spigots on the outside of our house to ensure that we have those frost-free, that they're installed the appropriate way. And you're like, why are we talking about this minute detail? Well, something as simple as that pipe breaking can cause tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage because of that broken pipe that happens over Christmas when we shut down for a few days. Replace hoses regularly. If you have a washer and dryer, those hoses on your washer and dryer don't last forever. And so regularly replace those types of things. Put drip pans under things like water heaters. Ensure that your floor drains are open and clear and that they'll flow. Leak detection systems. They have little battery powered leak detection systems, water intrusion sensors that you can put in the basement or an area that might be prone to flooding, that will have just a really annoying alarm go off if water gets in there, and it will allow you to catch that sooner. In those areas where we have continual problems, ensure that your sump pumps are working and they're on a circuit that won't be interrupted some way, and that you have some sort of alarm that will let you know if they're not properly working. Earthquakes. This will probably get more people's attention this year because we've experienced a number of earthquakes, one big one and a whole bunch of smaller ones that came along after that. Know where you live. We look at this map here, shows the zones. That zone 3 that they're showing there is the highest risk for earthquakes, but it can happen anywhere in the state of Utah. But we need to build for our area, and not just zone 3. I might be in an area where I'm right along the Wasatch Fault. And so I need to build for those specific local concerns as well. If I'm building that building right there, I'd recommend that you don't build it right over the fault. But if I'm building in that neighborhood, build to the code for that area. Seismic bracing of fire sprinklers, gas services. Let's see. I'll talk about those in just a second. Anchor shelves. Put some screws through those shelves. If you have a library, anchor those to the floor, to the wall, or anchor those together so they don't tip over in the event of an earthquake. Train your staff, drill. Every year we have the Utah's Great Shakeout, and that's a great opportunity and an excuse to do our earthquake drill. And there are tons of resources available at shakeout.org, and that'll take you right to the Utah Shakeout. Here are just some pictures of earthquake controls, ensuring that our gas-fired equipment has those flex couplers. So if an earthquake happens, we don't break our gas lines. If you have fire sprinkler systems, install those seismic braces up to the seismic zone that you're in. And how do I know all this, or how do I find out what do I need? Once again, go back to your building officials. Okay. Well, I'm going long on this. I'm gonna go quick. Crime and cyber loss prevention. So we should be realistic about crime. It happens, and be realistic about where we're located. You may be in a low crime area. It doesn't make you immune to that. Probably the most important thing is secure your facilities, and I put on here, really secure your facilities. Do a test today. Go see if you could, without a key or a card, get into your facilities in the middle of the day. Could somebody get in there to steal something or potentially hurt one of your staff? Check that out, and let's get serious about securing those facilities. Make sure our lights work, clear landscaping and things like that are that are blocking views. Consider cameras in appropriate locations. Graffiti is something we talk about, the broken window experiment that they did, that, you know, you can park a car along the side of the road and people generally leave it alone. But if you break a window in that car, pretty quick, it's up on blocks, the tires are all gone, and it's damaged. With that thought in mind, if there's graffiti, deal with it immediately, cover it up. The taggers go to a lot of work to put this graffiti up there, and if it disappears before anybody else gets to see it, they get depressed and they'll go somewhere else where they don't work that hard. So get rid of that as soon as we can. Let's talk about cyber quickly. Here, these are the different types of attacks. Talk about prevention. Build a team. Don't just plan on your IT department covering all of the cyber security. This needs to be something that involves the top level of management and an overall plan. We need to build a plan, or we will fail when it comes to our cybersecurity. Know who your enemies are. Plan for the types of attacks that you might see. If you have a police department, even if you've never had any problems with the public, there's a certain portion of the country that doesn't like police departments, and they may have a plan, or you may have never had an officer involved shooting or other high profile incident, but when it happens, there's a high potential that you will be attacked. And so part of your plan should be for that. If you don't have a police department, you probably don't have to worry about that nearly as much, unless all the water, you know, all the people getting water in your community get mad at once. Build your system security, and this is IT is going to be a big part of this. Firewalls, encryption, redundancy of your servers are essential. We've seen some situations where ransomware attacks have gone in and have locked up all of the data, and the organization had zero backups, had no way to recover that. Now, if you've got a redundant system where you can get to that backup, we just tell the pirates to go away. We're not going to pay your ransom, and we've got all of our data, and we can restore it. It's a pain, and it's going to hurt for a while restoring all of that, but you can make it work. Look at the physical security of your devices. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've got people packing around laptops and cell phones that can get into your network, you have a big risk there. Somebody loses their phone in a taxi or on a bus, there's a potential that people can get into your system and cause you significant damage. So we want to put systems in place to be able to deal with the physical security of those things. We need to train staff. What do we train them on? We need to train them, don't click on that link in the email. And if we could get people to not click on that link, many of these attacks would be foiled. But they've done a lot of research, and they find that about 80% of people, even after even IT people, even data security people, will end up clicking on the link. So think about that every time. Look and be suspicious of what that email says. Okay, we've covered a lot of things. Oh, and test your system. Send out an attack that you create with a link to your staff, and see how many people click on it. You can test your system, and then you can go back and retrain and help them out. All right, lots of stuff that we've covered today, and we are happy to talk with you about all of this. Please feel free to give Doug, Brent, or myself a call, Ryan and his team as well, to help you out on these preparations, questions on as far as coverage and what you schedule and all of those things. We appreciate all of your efforts out there. I know this stuff is work, but it's essential. It's essential for us to be prepared. So when the bad thing happens, we're able to respond and be able to get back to normal as soon as we possibly can. All right, folks, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the chat box, and I'll answer those, or Ryan or Doug or Brent will answer those questions. Ryan, Doug, Brent, anything that I muffed up or missed, or questions?
No muffs or misses, Jason. That was great.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. I'm not seeing much coming in for questions. I'm glad we answered the ones that we had earlier. Ryan, any thoughts? Last thoughts?
Just one of the thoughts that I had as you were going through it was, and you hit on it right there at the end, it does take work. It can be overwhelming at times, and kind of a daunting task to launch into security measures for IT, for example, for cybersecurity, or any of these things that you've talked about. But it's one of the things that we appreciate most about our membership is that many of them are so willing to jump in, get their hands dirty and do it. And commonly, one of the things that we hear back, that my team hears back about loss prevention, is just how grateful members are to be able to access your resources and have you come out oftentimes and do an on-site risk assessment or whatever. And so I just wanted to put a little plug in again for you guys and loss prevention. We're happy to get in the trenches with you as much as we possibly can. We know that ultimately members are doing the work, but we're happy to help and augment whatever they're doing to whatever extent we can. So use us, utilize these guys.
For sure. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, we definitely, 2020 has been a struggle for us because we're used to being out there working with you, and that hasn't been possible as much this year. But we're available. We'll definitely practice social distancing and all the important things there. But we're happy to come out and do risk assessments and walk through these questions with you, as is Ryan's team. So thank you so much, folks. Appreciate your time and attention today. Please address us with any questions and we'll be happy to help out. Go out and have a safe day. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate the help.
Thanks, Jason.
Good stuff. I'm going to close maybe I will. There we go. Close the live stream.